fellow Patriots. Welcome back to Patriots of the American Republic. We got another episode. Let's go ahead and get into it. If anybody's been paying attention to the media, they spent the last, 10 years bashing Trump and trying to make him look like horrible villain. They've called him Hitler and whatnot and so on and so forth, while spending the same amount of effort to prop up their preferred party, their guy, whether it's Obama or Biden or Hillary, right? Without a doubt, they defended Obama like if he was their messiah, and they championed for Hillary. But in my eyes, they've gone above and beyond for Biden to make him look competent, to make him look successful, and to make him look, like a coherent person and a leader. This administration has been disastrous when it comes to three specific topics. And they're three very important topics. I think these are like the top three topics of most or the majority of people, right? Our economy is unsustainable as inflation remains high under this current administration. The cost of living is so high, many folks are unable to afford, just basic needs, basic necessities. Some people can't even go out and live out their dream and buy a home. They have to stay at home with their parents. Some people that have been retired have to come out of retirement and, work at a local supermarket to make ends meet. None of which are good, right? And we'll get into a lot of that stuff here. In addition to the economy, the border remains wide open. The border is, we've got millions, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm not being, hyperbolic. We've got, I think some estimates put it around 11 million illegal immigrants have come in under the watch of this current administration. And the problem is, the obvious, we don't know who's coming over. Due to that, we there's a lot more news about, violent crimes, specifically sexual crimes. But in addition to that, there's a lot of risk. There could be a potential terrorist that comes through and so on and so forth. We'll get into specifics when I get into that area, right? Obviously, that's not being done on accident, but rather one can argue it's being done on purpose. And then the final point or the final area that we're going to talk about is, the international policies, right? Are we secure, not just in our own border, but abroad? Do I feel safe as an American traveling outside of my country? No, I don't. But on top of that, the policies that happen in, between other countries, right? The conflict between Russia and Ukraine happened a year into Biden's administration. Interestingly enough, Russia attacked Ukraine under Obama. If I'm not mistaken, he attacked under Bush Jr., but definitely did it under Obama administration. And now he's doing it, he's done it under the Biden administration. In addition to Russia-Ukraine conflict, we have Israel, who was attacked by Hamas on October of last year in 2023, and is now being attacked by Iran. That just happened maybe about 2 weeks ago. Over the course of this series of videos, I'm going to do 3 videos, one highlighting each of them, but they're all going to fall under the same umbrella as far as how disastrous this administration is. We're going to dive into these aspects and show the terrible leadership as well as the media's gaslighting, right? How they cover up. So let's jump into our first video, or the first subject that we're going to talk about, which is Bidenomics. Now, we've heard a lot of that in the last 4 years. What do you feel what comes to your mind, or what emotion triggers you when you hear the word Bidenomics, right? Obviously, we're talking about some of the things that we talked about, right? High inflation, right? Specifically, right? But Bidenomics. But before we get into the details and the specifics of where we're at with Bidenomics, let's start off and remember, let's take you down memory lane, how they told you that inflation was going to be transitory. And this was right off the bat. They saw the levels of inflation starting to go up, and they said it would be transitory. Let's take a watch.
That these inflation rises will be transitory, that they will come back down next year.
Will settle down.
Transitory.
That
inflation will come down next year.
This is going to be ease inflationary pressure, not increase it, ease inflationary pressure.
It will ease longer-term inflationary pressures.
This bill is going to ease inflationary pressures. Everything from a gallon of gas to a loaf of bread costs more. Do you ever think you'd be paying this much for a gallon of gas?
So that's a refresher, and it was over and over, and it was reported by the media. It was transitory. It would be transitory until they couldn't play that transitory game anymore. So now that we have our base, right, we know that it's not transitory. We're 3 years, almost 4 years into this administration. It's coming to hopefully the end in this November or by the end of this year. Because if there is a change of power, it'll take place in January. But the point is that we are at the end of this guy's first term, and we know that it's not transitory, right? We know that, and I've said this plenty of times, time is our best ally to determine who's BSing us and who's not. So it's clearly this administration was lying to us from the very beginning. If they weren't lying to us, then they were wrong. And there are plenty of moments where they had experts come on and say that they were transitory, like the Secretary Janet Yellen, right? She came out, and she's the Secretary of Treasury. She came out and was talking transitory. She was the biggest mouthpiece for transitory next to the press house secretary, right? Once they could no longer tote that false narrative, then they tried to blame it on Trump. His tax cuts were the reason of inflation, right? So giving money back to the people was a cause for inflation. That makes no sense whatsoever. But then they're going to try and gaslight you and tell you that it was the tax cuts for the rich and so on and so forth. Hey, you know what? If there are tax cuts for those people, that has nothing to do with inflation. Inflation doesn't come from tax cuts. Inflation comes from what they've done is pump so much money into the system that it's devaluing and it's making everything go up. And then, of course, you have things that did contribute, like C-19, but they definitely used that as their primary focal point. They didn't try to look at their own policies. For example, and we covered this last year. You know, when Biden came in, one of the first things he did was cancel the Keystone Pipeline. You don't think that impacts the gas? You don't think that's going to impact our ability to pump more and self-sustain ourselves, right? No, what did we do? We canceled that, then we started going to Iran, then we started going to OPEC, then we started to go into Venezuela and asking them for oil, right? It's absolutely absurd. Then when they couldn't float that anymore, it was Putin's fault. It just so happens that Putin invaded Ukraine, like we mentioned, and then everything suddenly became his fault. Even though gas prices have been going up, because remember, Putin attacks a year after the administration goes into power, right? And gas prices went up almost immediately from Biden taking over and making all those changes. Remember, he did a bunch of executive orders, like on the first, I don't know if it was the first day or the first week, he had a bunch of executive orders. So, you know, ladies and gentlemen, we've discussed it several times on this podcast. The left loves to move all types of goalposts as part of their deceptive strategy, and they keep pushing the lie until, you know, they have a new talking point. We just went down. You know, it went from no inflation, inflation transitory, Trump's tax cuts, Putin's fault, C-19. They launched everything and anything that they could, and they refused to look at themselves. And this next video is going to summarize that exactly.
As our economy has come roaring back, we've seen some price increases. Some folks have raised worries that this could be a sign of persistent inflation. But that's not our view. Our experts believe, and the data shows, that most of the price increases we've seen were expected and are expected to be temporary. The reality is you can't flip the global economic light back on and not expect this to happen. As demand returns, there's going to be global supply chain challenges. We've seen that in semiconductors, which are used in automobiles. That global shortage has slowed vehicle production, creating a temporary spike in car prices. That's a real challenge. My administration will do everything we can to address it. But again, these disruptions are temporary. Lumber prices are another example. They spiked early in our recovery, but in recent weeks, they began to fall. They've fallen by more than 50%. In the hospitality industry, prices are returning to where they used to be. Economists call all these things transitory effects, and they account for about 60% of the price increases we've seen over the last few months. Now, I want to be clear. My administration understands that if we were to ever experience unchecked inflation over the long term, that would pose a real challenge to our economy. So while we're confident that isn't what we're seeing today, we're going to remain vigilant about any response that is needed.
So, as you can see there in that video, number one, this video was taken about a year ago, right? So that would have been into his second year, the third year going into it. And we see the bunch of lies. We see the lies that the economy is roaring back. We see the deceptiveness. So what these people do is they'll take bits and pieces of what favors them, and they won't look at the total picture. So for example, imagine your kid coming home with a report card and they got an A in, I don't know, gym, but everything else is like D's and F's. Is that really a good report card? Or you know, it's an A or an A in gym, and then a B in math, and then everything else is C's, D's and F's, or D's and F's, right? That wouldn't be a good report card, but that child is going to highlight to you, hey, look, I got an A in gym, or I got a B in math, right? They're going to show you only the good, favorable things. They're not going to show you what obviously it doesn't favor them. And in this particular case, we're now a year later from that particular video that I just showed. Where are we now with inflation? Is it still transitory like he mentioned? No, it's still high as heck, right? So he talked about unchecked hyperinflation. Okay, what are you doing? What are you doing? It doesn't look like you're doing much. And not for nothing, but Congress on both sides of the aisle aren't helping either. But anyhow, like I said, it's been 3 years since the incorrect or false claims of transitory inflation. Here we are now in 2024, and inflation is still high, despite Joe telling us that the economy is strong as hell. We heard a little bit of that in that video that we just played. Let's hear him again tote the lie that the economy is strong as hell.
Yes, our economy is strong as hell. The internals of it. Inflation is worldwide. It's worse off everywhere else than it is in the United States. So the problem is the lack of economic growth and sound policy in other countries.
So there you have it. Last year he talked about how our economy was strong as hell. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know who's watching. I don't know where you guys are at. But you can see it all around you. The economy is not strong as hell. And then the flip, right? Did you notice how he then went on to show the rest of the world? Well, the rest of the world is worse off than we are. And I've heard that talking point several times in several locations, in several areas. I don't care. I don't mean to sound disingenuous, but as an American, those other countries have their presidents, have their leadership, and they can run the country however they want. I care about where I live. I care about where my family lives. I care about my fellow Americans. How are we doing? I don't care about the rest of the world. I care about America right now. And so for him to kind of redirect, to point to other countries and say, well, we're not that bad. No, we shouldn't be bad at all. We really shouldn't. And if this guy had any economic sense, or his handlers had any economic sense, they would know, because a lot of the policies that these people are putting in place it's self-inflicted wound, right? In many cases, sure, there's some degree that some inflation is going to be outside of their control, but a lot of it isn't. A lot of it is self-inflicted. So after almost 4 years, who do we blame for high inflation? Apparently, it's not Joe Biden, because Joe Biden doesn't believe that it's his fault. Hey, it's Trump's fault because the tax cuts, because he shut down the government during C-19. And you know what? That whole shutting down the government, yeah, Trump did it, And I even said it. I didn't have my channel at the time, but I said, you know what? The economy is just as delicate as health. And so when you do what was being proposed by Democrats, it was being pushed because the media was on. They were hammering Trump to shut down the economy. They were making him seem like, oh, you care more about money than you do people's lives. And so they actually forced him and manipulated him into shutting down the economy. So, and here we are. There are a lot of people struggling. A lot of people now poor, even poorer than before. So one thing does affect another. But anyhow, let's see who do we blame, Joe? Who can we go to? Let's take a look.
I'm heading off to Philadelphia, and if you want to ask me a question about the economy, but I'm not going to answer any question about anything else because you never will cover this.
Mr. President, why did you decide to postpone Secretary Blinken's trip? Take any blame for inflation, Mr. President?
Am I taking blame for inflation? No.
Right. Why not?
Because it was already there when I got here, man. Remember what the economy was like when I got here? Jobs were hemorrhaging. Inflation was rising. We weren't manufacturing a damn thing here. We were in real economic difficulty. That's why I don't. Thank you.
Mr. President, when and how will you rebuild Berlin? When and how will you rebuild Berlin, Mr. President?
Did you see the lie there? The inflation was already there when he got. Actually, it wasn't. Due to C-19, prices everywhere dropped. Gas for, let's say, prior to C-19 hitting, on average, and I'm going to talk about here in Florida because this is where I know, but on average, it's not that far off. We were like around 219, 230, somewhere in between that mark, right? And then when C-19 hits, I remember here in this area, it dropped down to like 189. I was like, wow, I felt like we were back in the early 2000s or something like that, right? So it fell to 189. A lot of things were cheaper during that entire year. And then they started to, the economy started to kind of pick up again towards the end, but inflation hadn't picked up. Inflation starts to pick up as soon as he comes into office. So he's completely lying to the American people. Now, I do want to say, when I'm touching on this subject about gas, I've seen memes that, from the right that talk about where are you better today than you were 4 years ago, and then they do comparisons, specifically when it comes to gas prices, showing where we're at today, which is, I think we're around 350 somewhere there, to where it was 4 years ago, 189, and I don't think that's a fair comparison because that was during C-19 when everything shut down. I think that if we're gonna do as close to an apples to apples comparison, I think we really should be using pre-C-19 numbers. So 350 compared to 219 is still a lot, right? We're talking about almost $1.25 more, right? And that's not the peak, because remember, we hit the peak. I think it was, I don't know if it was last year or the year before. Here in Florida, we hit like $4 or just about $4. In California, I actually saw in California today, somebody posted it was like $7, 7 and change. That's a huge. Could you imagine paying $7 a gallon for gas? It's ridiculous. So I think, to be fair, I think we got to do on the right. We got to be careful. Let's try and not be misleading. We want to be as accurate as possible. Now the left is going to make post C-19 arguments, but we know that this inflation was mainly caused to like I said before, the government pumping out so much money, all that bailout money, has ignited, right, the hyperinflation. So that's there, and for this guy to not take a blame for, of course he's not going to take blame. It's human nature for us not to take blame and point fingers somewhere else, right? That's just the way we all are, unfortunately. But that's just my opinion, right? As far as the things that we just covered regarding the comparison, right? That's just my opinion. But I really do think that if we want to be accurate and we want to do the apples to apples, we should use accurate numbers, right? Now, from energy to food to everything else, like I said, this is a self-inflicted wound brought onto us by the government and poor leadership. Now, in the end, these people were going to tell you everything and anything in order to make this guy or their guy look good. But we can see that they're full of it. I mean, we can see it. That video that I just showed, he's like, oh, that's how it was when I got here. Is that really how it was when you got here? Let's take a look at this next video.
I'm telling you, they're going to double down on crazy. One last thing, by the way, they posted the greatest loss in the history of Twitter yesterday on Twitter, the Biden White House. This is real. They're like, hey, great news. Inflation's coming down, giving families real breathing room. Here, look at the chart. Everyone in chat, look at this. So what about that chart looks interesting? Notice the peak and the inflation going up starts exactly when Joe Biden gets into office. Right? Yes, Guy said it right. The intern forgot to crop the picture. Inflation has fallen by more than half. It's a picture of inflation spiking exactly when Biden got into office and never returning back to the Trump years. This is the greatest L ever posted in the history of Twitter. That intern's probably fired right now. This is great. The propaganda minister at the White House screwed it up. That is great. You got to see the tweet. If you didn't watch it on Rumble, check us out on Rumble.
Did you see that? Did you see the chart? So under Trump, we're underneath 2% inflation. And then it just, as soon as January 2021 comes, starts to skyrocket up. Skyrockets all the way up to the top, to the 9% almost. And then yes, it does start to come back down, but it's nowhere near the under 2% where it was in Trump. It's I don't know, what it was, around 4%, 6%, in between 4 and 6%, somewhere around there. So again, it's like, again, these people are gonna lie to you. These people and they accidentally told the truth there with the chart. But if you would have seen the press secretary and the presentation, inflation's coming down. We're doing our job. So that was also last year. Okay, inflation's coming down. Guys, where are we today? Where are we today? Like I said, gas is now like around $3.50. Bacon is still almost $11. That's like, now we're talking about Oscar Mayer bacon, right? And before this hyperinflation, it was like 4 and change, under $5. Liter of orange juice, $9, where that was also like 3, 4, under $5. Dozen eggs, over $3. That was like $1. It was under $2 before. These are everyday household items. That's not including like the rise of chicken and meat. It's like almost double in both cases. So on average, I think people are spending about $400 more on groceries for the same amount of food they were buying before. And it's all a result of this administration's, disastrous economic policies. It's definitely a contributing factor. There's no way to get around it. And for them to point fingers is just completely false. Or to claim that the economy is strong. It is not strong. It is not strong. And here's my biggest concern. Let's say he wins, it's going to get worse. It'll remain this high or get worse. If Trump wins, I still don't think it's going to go down. Certain things will go down. I think gas is one of the easiest things that'll go down. But here's the thing, and I think I've said this before. As a teenager, my dad would always tell me, things go up because gas goes up. So when gas goes up, the products that get transported via gas, they go up naturally, right? Because they have to. The company's not gonna consume or absorb that extra cost. It goes on to you, the consumer. So when gas goes up, right, products and goods go up, understandably. But when gas goes down, do the products and goods go back down? I've never personally seen it. Maybe there's a report out there that would indicate that and show it, but I personally haven't. So here's the thing. If you're willing to pay $11 for a pack of bacon in this current economy, should the economy turn around and get good again or get better, you're gonna pay it regardless. If you paid 11 during a bad economy, you're gonna pay 11 during a good economy. That's just the reality. Most things will remain as high. They are not going to get higher, but they will remain this high. So we're stuck with this inflation until unless, God forbid, there's some type of a crash like there was in 2008, some type of economic crash. And I don't think that's going to happen under Trump. Right? Like I said, I do think certain things will get better economically. Jobs and people's savings and people's earnings and so on and so forth. But as far as consumer products, I don't know, guys. I don't know. But that's it for this particular video on Biden economics. We'll tackle the open border crisis in the next video. So until then, God bless you guys. See you. Peace out.